The doorbell rang at exactly 6:45 a.m. on a Saturday. Yeah, that's right. Not even 7 in the morning. I stumbled out to the porch in my flannel pajama pants, hair a mess, and there stood Margaret Sterling, president of the HOA, in a pantsuit so stiff you could use it as a shield. She was gripping a clipboard like it was a police baton and shooting daggers at my Honda Civic, which was just minding its own business on the curb. I remember thinking, God, what now? She didn't bother with a good morning, just looked me dead in the eye and said, "You need to move your vehicle immediately." The kind of voice that could turn milk sour. I squinted at her, still half asleep, and mumbled, "Excuse me?" She rattled that clipboard, didn't blink. "I have an important guest for my garden party this afternoon. They need that exact spot in front of my house." Then she just stood there, like she expected me to salute and start moving. Now, here's the thing. This is a public street. Anyone can park there. So I told her, "Margaret, this is public parking." She looked at me like I'd spit in her coffee. "Some of us," she said, voice dripping with that special blend of HOA self-importance, "contribute to this community's prestige. My events elevate property values. The least you can do is show some consideration for your betters." And that, right there, was the moment I realized, today's not going to be normal, and Margaret Sterling just made herself my problem. Let me back up a sec. My name's David Chun. I'm 38, software engineer, pretty regular guy. I moved into Pine Ridge Estates 3 years back, thinking it'd be quiet, good schools, decent neighbors, the kind of place you go for a fresh start. What I didn't know was that Margaret had run the HOA like a private fiefdom for 7 years, and now I was about to find out just how personal she took things. Margaret, well, she lived 2 doors down in this over-the-top McMansion with 3 fountains out front and a visionary leader bio in the community newsletter, which, by the way, she edited herself. Her idea of community was making up rules for everybody but herself. Her parties were legendary, not in a good way, loud, fancy, guests parking everywhere. Unless you were Margaret, you'd get a note for leaving so much as a garden gnome out of place. After the Honda incident, the campaign began. First, it was passive-aggressive notes under my windshield wiper. "Dear resident, your vehicle's presence disrupts the visual harmony of our prestigious street. Please consider the community's image." Next came bogus HOA violations, excessive vehicle visibility. Not kidding. Then aesthetic noncompliance, because, apparently, my Civic was the wrong shade of gray. When that didn't scare me, she reported it as an abandoned vehicle, because I worked from home and didn't drive it daily. The next level, Margaret started putting up "Reserved for Margaret Sterling" signs along the curb, right in front of my driveway. When I took the sign down, she called the cops, claiming I stole her property. Even the responding officer tried not to laugh. "Ma'am, you can't reserve public parking with cardboard signs." But Margaret was just warming up. She called an emergency HOA meeting about parking regulations, proposed that the board, which basically meant her, could reserve spaces for community enrichment. This time, though, half the neighborhood showed up, most looking just as fed up as me. But the real twist came when she decided to up the ante. While I was at a doctor's appointment, Margaret hired a private tow company, paid cash under the table, no paperwork, to tow my car, claiming it had been abandoned over 72 hours. Total lie. I had security camera footage of me driving it the day before. The tow driver looked nervous, actually told me. She said I'd get all the HOA's towing work if I just handled this. But here's where things started to flip. My neighbor, James Morrison, a retired attorney nobody ever paid much mind to, saw the whole thing, filmed it, and brought the receipts. Turns out, James had been keeping tabs on Margaret for years. He pulls out this old-school accordion folder stuffed with HOA newsletters, invoices, and a flash drive full of shady party invitations Margaret had sent out, charging for tickets to her community galas. It was illegal as hell, basically running an unlicensed event venue out of her house. James and I teamed up, late nights, sharing coffee and war stories at his kitchen table, digging through old financials, emails, you name it. What we found was bigger than just towing scams. Margaret was embezzling from the HOA, funneling money into her parties, hiring her cousin's landscaping business for work that never happened, taking kickbacks from vendors. James figured she'd siphoned off at least 40 grand in 3 years. But the worst was the intimidation. She'd been secretly recording residents at meetings, keeping files on everybody, even demanding background checks for new buyers and storing the info for leverage. She knew who'd gone through divorces, bankruptcies, even who'd had cancer. She used it to keep people quiet. When Maria Gonzalez, born in Texas, for the record, complained about Margaret's illegal fines, Margaret threatened to call immigration on her. Another neighbor got threatened with child services because his kids played outside after 5 p.m. I mean, who does that? Armed with all this, James and I went to the other board members, who honestly looked like they'd been waiting for someone to make the first move. They called for a full audit and an emergency election. Margaret lost it, accused us of running a witch hunt, but once the numbers came out, nobody was buying her act anymore. She'd forged signatures, pocketed fines, even used official HOA letterhead for blackmail. The showdown at the emergency meeting was something straight out of a movie. Margaret showed up in this bright red suit, carrying folders and some dramatic slideshow about preserving community values. She tried to turn the tables, said I was jealous, James was senile, the rest of us were threats to neighborhood unity. But resident after resident stood up, one by one. An elderly lady fined $500 for having the wrong color garden hose. A family nearly evicted because their kids' bikes were on the porch. A veteran harassed for flying a too large American flag. The room was packed, the air electric, and you could feel the fear finally shifting off everyone's shoulders. James presented the audit results. The board called a vote. Margaret was out, banned from any HOA position forever. You'd think that'd be enough, but oh no, it kept rolling. The district attorney's office took one look at the file and pressed charges: embezzlement, fraud, forgery, you name it. The trial was fast. There was just too much evidence. She tried to cut a deal, but the prosecutor lived in a nearby HOA Margaret once tried to take over. Karma, right? The judge, an old Marine type, didn't mince words. Called her a menace to the community and a petty tyrant who abused every ounce of trust. He sentenced her to 3 years in prison, minimum 18 months, plus 72 grand in restitution. She lost her real estate license, got banned from HOA boards for life. When the sentence was read, Margaret didn't say a word. Face went from red to pale gray, tears started, and for once, she couldn't talk her way out. As the bailiff let her out, the whole courtroom just watched. Nobody cheered, but nobody looked away. 7 years of fear, finally broken. And I know some folks felt bad for her, or maybe for what the neighborhood became after the dust settled. But me? I looked around, saw James nodding, saw Maria hugging her kids in relief, and I realized sometimes the only way to clean up a mess is to drag everything out into the light. Thing is, we never did get rid of all the drama. New board, new faces, same old arguments about lawn height and mailbox colors. But people spoke up more now, they pushed back. And every so often, someone would look at Margaret's old house, now empty, for sale sign out front, and remember just how bad it got, and how fast things can change when a community decides enough is enough. So what do you think? Was Margaret the villain, or just a product of a broken system? Ever had a neighbor like that? Or worse, an HOA nightmare of your own? Drop your story below. Let's hear about your wildest HOA run-ins. Because honestly, sometimes the only way out is through, and the only way through is together. If you stuck around this long, hit like, share your take, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because trust me, there's always another one around the corner.